everyone. Ariel Adams here with the aBlogtoWatch Superlative Podcast. Be sure to listen to our other podcast, aBlogtoWatch Weekly, where we talk about the latest watch news and reviews. My guest today on Superlative is Huiy Tang. He's the co-founder of RZE Watches, and he's in Canada. Huiy, welcome.
Thanks, Ariel. I'm honored to be here with you today.
So we have a lot to discuss because you're a brand that, like many others, is not only making watches, but also trying to figure out, how do we refine this business model? How do we have a brand that has its own website that markets to people, that encourages people to interact again and again? You're doing all these interesting initiatives in addition to watches, which I love. And that's sort of the business side. So hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit about the product as well as the business. Now, out of curiosity, right now, January 2025, what's more interesting to you? The brand RZE or the individual products that you're making? Because those are two completely different things that I know you put effort into.
Yeah, I think it's complicated. I think the things go hand in hand. Obviously, that's the most politically correct or centered approach to it, I think. But the brand is probably the thing that we focused on the most in the last year or two. You came in with Ultra Hex titanium, the scratch resistant titanium coating that kind of was innovative for our pieces. And that was where it was product based. And then we wanted to kind of follow up on that. We definitely iterated and improved it. But I think in the last year, we got to a place where we really got refined enough in our product line and comfortable in that we had a lot of models that were regularly available in stock, where a lot of people could come to the brand and find a piece that resonated with them. And that led us to kind of focusing on the brand and then tailoring that to make sure that all the customers that come to us, or what we call them as adventurers, come to us at a place where they can find a product that they'll enjoy. Next year, or this year, in 2025, we're going to go back to product to innovate and bring something exciting and new. But I think for the last year, it's been a real focus on brand.
Now, before I talk about that in detail, because I'm quite interested in some of the things you did, I want to ask why. I think it's normal for people to start a watch brand with an emphasis on the product, right? No one starts a watch brand because they don't like watches. They have a vision of, these are the types of watches we want. And in an ideal world, that's where they put most of their attention. When they have to start working on the brand itself, it means that they see issues in being able to just do product. The market is quite competitive. Consumers have maybe a learning curve. They don't quite understand what they're trying to do. And then they need to focus on all this communication and personality building, which is the branding. So I think the question is why, and even if it's obvious answer, why did RZE make the decision that we are going to be an interesting brand in addition to an interesting series of products?
Yeah, so this is, I guess it's an interesting thing because Travis and myself are two very different people, obviously. The brand's founded in Singapore and I'm based in Canada. And I came in late as a co-founder to the brand after kind of Travis had developed some of the products and things like that. And, part of the honor of being here today is that I think as a watch enthusiast all my life, I read a lot of articles on aBlogtoWatch and stuff growing up. And I've always been a vintage collector ever since I was a child. And so there was a lot of interesting things that I think you wrote about early in the blog that were kind of innovative and exciting and stuff like that. But there were things for me to appreciate, but I would never purchase that. And then there was a time where then I saw micro brands come and there's really interesting homages and different things where the market was developing. And then I thought to myself, okay, now this is getting really interesting because we're seeing different technologies and things like that. And Kickstarter was happening and stuff. But coming from being a long time watch collector, I would keep asking myself, but why wouldn't I just buy an Omega Constellation vintage serviced and have all that heritage, all that brand and stuff like that? And aside, we're not talking about investment value or anything like that, but I've always thought about the romance of owning a watch, having a story that
the fun
tells
of wearing
itself. Yeah, it's the fun of wearing it. And it's so beautiful. All of the movie watches and things like that, of times it's it captures something and it wasn't so spec driven. And I think that in conversation with Travis before we started working with him with the marketing and coming on, to make this my life commitment. It was that we needed to build something of a legacy, like 100-year brand, like one of those things that didn't just emphasize the specs, because I mean, we can respect all of the different specifications and unique innovations that all the watch brands of old. But I think that one of the great examples is that, like, we know that Squale made the Blancpain cases and stuff like that, but like that was a spec. And like, it's obviously still here and there's heritage and stuff like that, but there's a big difference between Squale and Blancpain, and what Blancpain did as a brand and emphasized is, what led to them being acquired and going to a group and things like that. There's obviously a complicated story here, but I don't want to end up in a situation with our brand where we delivered a specific spec, which is fantastic, and a product that's fantastic. But I wanted to make sure that our brand had a story that someone could tell. And it wasn't just articles. It was like things that were tangible and things that people could talk about at a dinner table. Like, these are the things that these watches can do, or what they've done, or where they've been, or where they'll be and stuff. So yeah, that's where we shifted in terms of finding stories that we could tell that jumped off the page and outside of kind of the niche world.
That's interesting. Let me try to unpack that a little bit, because I think, there's people out there like you that are either established their own little brands, or even thinking about it, or just wondering what it's like. And what I'm hearing is, in your instance, and that of many others, you begin as a watch fan, right? You have no plans of making a brand or having this be part of your business. You just like watches. You're a hobbyist. And over the years, you develop preferences. There's features you want, materials you like. And so when you get to the role of actually thinking about making a new product, you just sort of revert to my list, right? I like these sizes. I like these materials, or I want to try this. And you try to formulate in that way. And oftentimes people become, like tech spec driven. There's a lot of enthusiasts. They're like, I don't care about the brand. I just want the best specs for the price. And it's natural to sort of recognize there's others out there like you. However, once you've made watches for all those folks, there's only so many watches they can buy. Exactly. You recognize, I have a nice watch that's well priced and looks good and it's made a lot of people happy. But I'm in a competitive space with a lot of watches like this. In order to break out and sell more watches to more people, I need to create a different way of communicating this is a good product, rather than look at my awesome tech specs, right? Because there's a small number of people that even know how to interpret that information. So it's kind of like mainstreamification of an enthusiast product. And you ask yourself, why do we like this? And words like adventure and history and durability and purpose-driven tool all come to mind. And then you have to, step even further and say, how do we build a brand that communicates these things for people that aren't curious, like watch lovers, right? Watch lovers are curious. We'll want to figure out what it's all about. Most consumers are not. Like, if you don't tell them and explain to things like right away what your brand is all about, they're not going to stop and pay attention to discover it unless you just get in their face all the time, which is difficult or expensive to do. So for me, this is about evolving a brand from an enthusiast only focused to saying we have an enthusiast. It's not going to stop being an enthusiast product, but we want people to walk into our store like they would, an Arc'teryx or something like that, and be like, even if I don't understand why these pants are cool, I recognize they're meant for adventure, and I aspire to be someone that has adventure in my life. Is that resonating at all?
Absolutely. And I think that when we looked at the branding and the identity, like being an adventure brand, and, it has the spec to meet what's necessary for hardcore professional adventurers, just like any other, traditional tool watch. But in reality, we are just everyday adventurers. And I don't want to diminish that. In fact, that's something that we want to celebrate, is that this isn't going to be something that you're going to be climbing Everest every weekend with, but maybe once in your life, or you hope to someday visit, or you hope to, whatever it is, right? But it should encourage you to push it to the limits, because it can handle it, but it doesn't need to. And one of the things I think, as we kind of looked at outdoor brands, is like you said, like Arc'teryx is one of those examples, North Face, Patagonia and stuff. We looked at those brands that we reach to for the other things that we purchase in our lives, and we looked and thought about what they were offering. And, you know, you don't always hear about every single spec of that North Face jacket or anything like that, but you understand the quality, what it can handle. And then at the same time, you know, North Face has moved from this, but we looked at things like Carhartt does it, Patagonia does it, Canada Goose does it, and stuff like that, is things like being able to trade in your product so that there's product circularity, so that kind of, you know, that it's kind of guaranteed for life. Obviously, like for a watch, it's a bit tough because you know, with mechanical watches, obviously you can't guarantee the movement for life because it's like guaranteeing a car for life. You can't do that. But at the same time, we understand that some people who are purchasing watches in the casual market, they don't even understand that it's not running on a battery. Like, they don't understand that these things are meant to last lifetimes and that they're not typically fashion or anything like that. And so that education barrier is something that we kind of try to break down, and associating it to some hard goods from the adventure world kind of help with that.
Now, before we dive into that deeper, I guess my question is, how is that going so far? It's a good plan. It's hard to pull off. How successful would you say you are so far in making a watch brand that has, we'll call it, characteristics of some of those more popular, successful, usually clothing, outdoor lifestyle brands?
I think it's complicated to describe success. I think for us, we think it's successful in that, like, we do have a lot of first-time customers, and we have a lot of people coming to us for the first time purchasing a watch and asking these questions that we wouldn't typically be answering of enthusiasts and stuff. And I think that one of the things in the microbrand world that we often say at events like at Intersect and, you know, speaking to our friends at Notice or Jack Mason and so on and so forth, like Vario and things like that, is that, like, at the end of the day, enthusiast products are made for the enthusiasts, but there is a big mainstream market, and those people aren't looking for a specific spec. They're looking for something that resonates with them. So by better communicating what resonates with them, it's kind of like somebody who likes a t-shirt. Like, you don't always need to know the brand. You don't always need to know every detail of, like, where it's made and what it looks like and stuff. And so I think the way that we've worked with our ambassadors or our adventurers, and kind of the way that we've reached out to kind of do things that sport brands have done, and worked more on our environmental impact and stuff like that, I think that storytelling that is easy to translate to the kitchen table has translated to kitchen tables around the world. And I think that we're really proud when we have people that aren't watch wearers pick up our watches. We know that enthusiasts, if they get their hands on it, they'll understand, they'll appreciate it. It might not be for them, but maybe they'll have a friend that likes titanium and exclusively wants something in titanium, and they'll refer them our way. We're patient in that long-term success, I think, and that's what we're investing in. But vision-wise, I think we've been successful in communicating that.
I think what's important to say is what's at stake. And what's at stake is that if you want to be just a brand that sells good enthusiast watches to enthusiasts, you kind of limit yourself. You cap yourself at a certain amount of growth. You can have a nice little ongoing thing for years, but you're never going to break outside of that enthusiast group of people who already come to you with knowledge about why your product is worth looking at. But all the big brands, the ones that sort of break out of that sort of boutique business space that, you know, in some instances get purchased by bigger groups or go on to have, you know, sizable, annual revenues, and they sell a lot of watches to some enthusiasts, but also a lot of, you know, lay people. They all have to have a very strong brand behind the product. In fact, in many instances, the brand is more important than the product. Over the last couple of decades, you've seen a lot of businesses in the United States and North America and Canada. It's funny, they start as the brand first versus a product. They put all the time and attention to the brand and what they want people to spend and what they want people to feel. And it's like the last thing they do is like, okay, guys, and what do we sell? Right?
Yeah.
And we got really good at that. So success in the watch space is, as you said, it's complicated and tricky, but this merger of those two things, you have to have this harmony and successful interaction between great product and great brand. And there's not that many companies out there that truly do both super, super well. Some of the success stories are like a Rolex out there who has a great product to stand behind and a great brand. I have said oftentimes that you can't be a good brand without having both great brand and great product. But for me, that's just some of the context at what's at stake in this. Speaking of that, you guys have gone on, how should I say it, proprietary term creation craze. You have all types of terms, both in the product and in terms of some of the programs you have. Tritanium, I think, is a good example of the type of terms that you come up with. Huiy, tell me, why is it that you decided to brand all these things? Obviously, some of these things are things that other brands do. Why was it important for you guys to brand it all?
I think it's like you had emphasized there, and that like brand is important for us. And in an enthusiast market, one of the things that makes it challenging, like I'd like to double back to that part of the balance you described, is that because we're so in such a curious group and like people are so caught up in the numbers and spec for dollar, bang for buck and stuff like that. Not to quote the trope or whatever of like, we took out all the marketing, we go direct to consumer, and now like you're able to get it for this much dollars. Like it's hard to pedal back from that. And there's always an enthusiast that's willing to kind of give it all just to make the dream happen, just like someone making a coffee shop happen or something like that. And then there's brands that want to make it. And I think that the big challenge for any watch brand to make it is that you compete with a lot of dollars when you're competing with the companies that are building brand first. Like you said, like if you invest all in the brand, it's super hard to deliver a great product. And then it's like, it's one of those like trifectas, like time, it being good and it being cheap, and in this instance, it's like brand, specs, and cheap, I guess. Like, it's, but sorry, the long way of that is that, I think that that's led us to kind of have to look at what product we developed and how good it was, like Ultra Hex or the coatings and things like that. And then thinking of like, okay, we have a great product. How do we translate telling lay people this thing without having to make it any more expensive? Because it's like, I don't need to make this 1% more better for a layperson. It's already as good as it needs to be. How do we make it sexy? I guess is kind of the thing. And sometimes words is what makes it interesting. Like, we use a lot of the things of old. I'm a big fan of like Jean-Claude Beaver. Like I'm a big, fan of marketing from the old past and stuff like that. So I look at a lot of old stuff and like think about alliteration and things like that kind of help it get catchy and get curious to make it inviting for people who are outside the hobby to think like, hey, like this isn't just a bunch of numbers and things that don't actually matter to me. Like, I mean, the reality is that like 0% of people, maybe like 0.0005% of people are taking a Rolex deep sea, like more than 100 meters. And that's probably the most commonly known, but not that desirable deep sea diver. And that's probably the specs example I can use.
I think it's fun. I mean, some brands don't do enough of it. You obviously decided to take like a whole period of time and brand everything. You run the risk, of course, of consumers being confused between the difference between Ultra Hex and Hexaflex and all these different things that can sound similar. I applaud you for doing it. I think it's fun. It's interesting that you've gone in so hard, so fast, and the consumer's like, "Wow, there's a whole vocabulary here to learn." That's fun.
Yeah, I think that one thing too is that we've decided not to use anything off the shelf as well, other than the movements. Like the molds are custom for the FKM strap. The bracelets are all different. Like our clasp is something that we worked on to develop for the micro adjust. Is not something that you typically experience. It's something that we really pride ourselves in and trying to be unique about it. And we know that, other people are going to do similar things or that they might end up being the same thing. But at the same time, we want to create that special feeling for people who come in and gravitate towards that kind of catchy name thing.
Well, when I go to your website, it's very obvious that you want to have a fine brand to act as a jacket to your products. you've gone so far as to have what I feel are like statements and pictures that could be billboard ads, right? Mm-hmm. Like you've gone so far as to want to communicate the product that you're creating. You're seeing the ad potential. I think that's what's interesting that you've been able to do is see the potential of creating succinct and hopefully sexy messages for the mainstream. Whereas a lot of the major brands, while they used to do this historically, for many years have been extremely superficial in their advertising. It's not that they haven't advertised, but it's like product. Here's what it looks like. Here's our brand. And like, that's it. And you're trying to flirt with certain ideas like our cases are durable and they're lightweight. What's a fun way of saying that? They're meant for adventure. What's a fun way of saying that? And I think that you need to have confidence in that imagery. And, you're probably in the process of doing it. Turn those into ads and banners and even huge ones that go in real world on billboards and the sides of buildings and stuff like that. Because that's great that you're taking it this far. Now, who does all this? I know that you're the sort of the design mind over there. How big is the team and who's focusing on these terms, on these visuals, on the product? It's a lot of different roles.
It's just all us. It's Travis is the founder with a longtime childhood friend, Clarence, and Clarence, has stepped away for a while. He's still involved with the business, but he's working on his day job. And Travis is, flying all over the world as a commercial airline pilot. So he's dedicated some of his time still to RZE, obviously, to push through it. But I mean, like myself, and we have some creative support from Andrew in Australia, and we have Kirk in Toronto that does some of the creative, and then we work with a lot of influencers or ambassadors in the watch space and stuff like that to kind of generate some user-generated content, stuff like that. But I've basically dedicated my time with Travis to kind of sit down over the last few years and kind of put it all together and work with our team and get some great creators and stuff like that involved to be able to kind of craft the imagery that we wanted. And so, it's something that we, like I said, in the last year or two, we really thought we have to invest all the time in kind of doing it. And we don't want to spend all of the money doing it. So we did kind of put in the sweat equity, what people would do, because the manufacturing side and stuff like that, Travis is kind of fine tuned. And an example would be like the Endeavor. A lot of people might be in the enthusiast world looking at the Endeavor and saying, I don't want an NH35. I don't want, this dive watch at this price because I can get this spec in XYZ and it doesn't make sense at this price anymore. Maybe it doesn't. But that's the part where it makes sense in our infrastructure, and that we don't want to go to Miyota there because there's no need to add the cost there or to make a new case or anything like that. It's a great dive watch, just like an SKX is a great dive watch, or Islander watch wouldn't be a thing. There's so many things where I think we're quick to say that's not good anymore, but it costs companies a lot of money to innovate and keep the ball being reinvented or turned or whatever. And I think that that's the challenge when I think that there's a lot of great enthusiasts that are making great brands and stuff out there that are making great watches. But it's like you said, you can only serve that audience once. And for people who want to build brands that have a long-term vision and stuff like that, it's very much like what Peter talked about on Superlative last time about how we're charging as little as we can to do the thing that we can want to do. And we're very thankful that we're able to do the thing that we do. But when you ask about if another brand could do the same thing in terms of putting up this kind of creative and stuff like that, I'm not challenging anybody to do it. It's expensive if you don't put in all the sweat equity and do it. But it's the same thing as creating a great restaurant or creating any great business is going to be all sweat equity and trying to make it work. And we really appreciate our consumers. We appreciate our adventurers. We appreciate, that people support us. And I think at the end of the day, to do a price hike to to accommodate for something that we value, which is the brand, and alienate the people who don't value that might support our product is a challenge that we face as well.
That's a really interesting point that I'd like to expand upon, because I think it's very important for many people to understand that this happens naturally. You make a brand because you want to make watches that you want, but because you're a discriminating collector, you quickly want to up the ante. You want to increase the specs and you want to do all this stuff. But then what you realize happens is what made you cool to begin with, which was sort of a fun design at a low price, you're now just another, I don't want to say mid-range, but you're too high for the entry level, but you're too low for luxury brand. And so you have this qualitatively great product that only you and your buddies actually know about and want. And you've sort of shot yourself in the foot from having sort of being able to cast a wide net. And so what you're talking about is this important discipline, I think you can call it, to say our focus should be to make watches as inexpensively priced as we can. Because there is enough of a luxury market. Most people out there, even several $100s for a watch is a lot of money. We're better off creating fruit that they can reach rather than something that just continues to match our own personal enthusiast expectations. And it's weird because you then need to start making watches for people who are fundamentally like a less mature version of yourself, right? Like you have to like go back in time and be like, what was I like the first 1 or 2 or 3 years of my collecting? What would have appealed to me? What would I have wanted to spend? And you have to continue to cater to that demographic, because the alternative is actually an area where it's vastly more competitive. It's vastly more, nuanced. There's vastly less customers, and you don't really gain much. And it's funny because it's like, if you become successful selling $500 watches, what you should really do is go buy that, $10,000 watch you really like, wear your brand's watches at events, but recognize, stop trying to satisfy me. I'm no longer the target demographic. Even if I was at some point, I no longer am. And I think it's very difficult for most, especially the small indie brand founders, to recognize this flaw in their own psychology. What do you think?
I think you've distilled it like better than I've ever heard anyone describe it. Like it's that exact thing without being disparaging is like, that's exactly it. I think if people decide that they can enjoy and appreciate the watches that they enjoy and appreciate, A, without owning them, or B, without having that influence what you'd like the masses to want, it would be better for everybody. I think it's just something that we challenge ourselves with every day too. I mean, one of the examples was we were looking at maybe innovating with the idea of adding Lumicasts just because we can. And then thinking about it, like how many people are going to want Lumicast or appreciate Lumicast and have, an X% price increase when we're trying to, increase our prices to, match with the cost of suppliers and
what is Lumicast for people that don't know?
Oh, it's when the block of the indices is molded of entirely loom, so you can see the edges would be loomed. Yeah, so it's not a paint,
it's something which is milled, so to say.
Yeah, and so it's just a very premium product. Like we see it in Panerai, and we've seen it in now Christopher Ward and stuff like that. But it is great as an enthusiast, but does it add anything to the customer that we typically serve? And is it worth it in terms of our future runway to make a bunch of those and then not have our entry-level product be available for people to arrive at and purchase it if they want it and force them to wait? It doesn't make sense. And I think that that's a balancing act that's challenging. And I think that, to even go further down the line of what you're talking about for a lot of founders and stuff is when they decide on that second collection, it's very difficult because you feel like you have to make progress. You have to do something other than restock or other than things like that. But I think like Rich at Studio Underdog is a great example, is like, you can just keep giving people what they want. There's people out there that like are waiting for the thing that you're making. And I think we have to be careful not to dismiss those people. And like when people are excited about something, we need to nurture them and encourage them and support them and not just tell them like, hey, it's not here anymore. Like you can go to eBay or whatever. And one of the things that comes to mind when we're talking about all the things I've coined in my life or whatever. When I talked to Travis, like I said, when we're building this brand, it's very critical that we think about a first dollar watch, and a first dollar watch as opposed to a last dollar watch. And that, like, if I'm like, I've just got a brand new job or I've got my first promotion or whatever, and I'm like at the mall, you know, back in the day in like the 2000s or the 90s or whatever, when you got your first dollar or whatever and you wanted to flex or be cool, you're like looking at going to the mall, seeing all the jewelry store signs and stuff like that. You see, maybe depending on the time, you see Pierce Brosnan, maybe depending on the time, you see, you know, Senna or whatever, like Tiger Woods or something like that. It's always jewelry store watches that you're looking at, and you're like, this is the price point I'm willing to pay for something that's nice. And the reason why I'm doing this is because it's going to be the watch I wear for the rest of my life or for the rest of my career, or to mark this milestone and stuff like that. And I said, like, I would really like for RZE or RZE to consistently deliver this on every SKU that we have, so that if someone has X budget and they arrive at us, it could be their one watch collection. It could be their first dollar piece, and they would be like, this is it. Might not be a compromise on something or whatever. This is great for what it is. And I think we need to really think about that every time we launch a SKU.
This is Ariel Adams with a message about Citizen watches. Did you know that for years, Atessa models have been the best-selling titanium watch in their category in Japan? Citizen debuted their very first titanium case in 1970 and has spent 55 years perfecting the high-performance material for watchmaking. Since 1987, the Atessa family of timepieces has been where Citizen has showcased their latest and greatest technology. This includes the masterfully durable and lightweight super titanium case and bracelet material, as well as miniaturized communication technology that has allowed its light-powered eco-drive hardware to communicate with atomic clock radio waves or global positioning satellite signals. Atessa was born in the high-paced commuter metropolis of Tokyo, where being on time is just as important as being stylish. Atessa is a mature companion for booking a bullet train to enjoying omakase cuisine with friends, and is always fully made in Japan. The latest 2025 Citizen Atessa EcoDrive satellite wave GPS watches introduce ceramic bezels and a brand new case and bracelet shape. When Citizen merges its greatest inventions with thoughtful design and beauty, the result is Atessa. Explore the full range on the Citizen Watch website now. That makes a lot of sense. And I also think it's important to say that some of the traditional watches people buy, if they weren't seeing a brand like RZE, you know, would be a G-Shock, a Timex, a Fossil. But exactly. The interesting thing is that those brands have not done, I think, as much as they could to talk to those audiences, especially in a modern sense. They have the products for it, but you know, you go to Timex, which we do, and like no one there is talking about their expedition models. You know what I mean? Like they sell them, but like no one at the company is excited to talk about it. The people at Casio, they're more excited talking about their several hundred or several $1,000 watches than sort of the, you know, the the bread and butter type of thing that sells, that actually is what people are thinking about. So you have this interesting opportunity where you can price yourself at a bit of a premium above them, but you can offer more exclusivity, more nuanced design, more originality, a little bit more of a personal touch. And so rather than going after that enthusiast group who is so focused on tech specs and history and knows all the different things out there, you create something where people who would otherwise get a very generic product just reach a little bit higher and therefore feel much more positive. They feel cool. They get to tell people like, you know, this is what I have. It's like, you know, it's like when everyone has a North Face, if you have the slightly different jacket, not a crazy luxury jacket, but one that costs 30% more, that's from a different company that has a slightly different design. People are like, oh, that's cool. And you feel like you went out and you did an enthusiast choice. You know what I mean? Like, I looked into this. I didn't just get the boring one that everyone else has. That's a huge market. It's probably bigger than your regular watch collector demographic, but watch collectors very rarely, even though they're often in that demographic, they don't necessarily think that way from a marketing perspective.
No, and I mean, a great example is just thinking about like when an enthusiast recommends like a budget watch to their friend, they're still always going to recommend to them like, you know, a Seiko or a Citizen or a G-Shock or, you know, like, because the person at your office is probably not going to sit down and have a lengthy conversation about he's excited about your knowledge because you're an enthusiast, but it's really hard to sway them to take that enthusiast choice. They'll arrive at the safe SKX or, SARB or whatever Seiko variant that person is compelled to, or maybe they'll end up at an Orient Bambino, they're all great. And I think that every watch enthusiast has to take it as a win when any layperson or person comes into the hobby buying anything like F91W, like celebrate, D5600, celebrate, like 8-lap, celebrate. Like, I think that that's the thing that Instagram was good for a while, but then it wasn't exactly that thing. As we've kind of moved into the pandemic era of watches, and as we recover from it, I'm starting to think that value watches and things like that are going to come back, and there's going to be more education, more enthusiasm around community and stuff like that in person and stuff like that. But for a while there, I think it was challenging because we still see it in the watch market. I mean, you guys are probably bombarded right now with piece unique Chinese New Year marketing pieces and stuff like that. And it's there's a lot of noise there, but we have to remember that there's also a lot of kids who are 13 that probably could use a watch that's not an Apple Watch, and what's great for them. And I think a really great example from the marketing world is the moment that Rolex is not F1, Tag is there, and Tag is collaborating with Kith, and that's really big for nurturing youth and the fan base that's on F1, and it being something that you and me would probably remember from years gone by. It's a throwback, and people can talk about value all they want. It's not about that. It's about brand. And it's Red Bull's marketing, Monster's marketing, as much as people don't like it. If we want to see the watch brands that are today flourish, we need to support the small brands, and we need to recognize that we have to pay for some of this marketing. Otherwise, they will disappear. There will be no creative. There will be no things like you say should be put on billboards and stuff like that. Is that at some point, one point back in the day, Jean-Claude Beaver went to, the studios and said I'll pay you $1 million for James Bond wearing Omega forever. And look where that took them. And it's we can complain, but it worked.
I mean, look, I've spent the better part of my career complaining to mostly European decision makers that investment in marketing is not something to be avoided and shamed. They are personally offended by the idea that they have to pay to make people aware of their brands. It's really just that simple. They have a cultural barrier to accepting the benefits of marketing. And one of the interesting manifestations of that is they've created product in lieu of investing in marketing. And I always wondered from a mathematical perspective if they've actually wasted an enormous amount of money this way. Meaning, are you better off making a smaller number of watches for a longer period of time and then taking the rest of your money and telling more people why these are desirable, or not doing the marketing and just pumping out product after product after product that are slightly different than before, thinking that instead of advertising, it's that one color or size or style that you're missing that's really preventing you from making it mainstream and hitting it big. And there's this culture now where they believe that I can only communicate by creating a new product, meaning the only time I want people to hear from me is when I have something new that I want them to buy, which is super dumb. Most of the time when you hear from a brand, it shouldn't be buy something. Most of the time it should be, let me teach you something. Let me inform, let me get you excited. And then once in a while, it's now you have something to buy. So I want to know your opinion. Have many entities in the watch industry been decidedly stupid by investing so much money into making products, sometimes research and development, big production runs, when they could have just been making the same products longer and marketing more aggressively to more people why they should want these things?
1,000,000%. 1,000,000%. I think a lot of independents or micro brands or whatever we want to call them would be great examples of that. I think a lot of people make that mistake in that like feeling like they have to do it. And even on a big brand scale, I think that that's the same thing. Like we could not be paying for research and development of all of people's future hopes and dreams and just have cheaper watches in lots of instances. You know, and I'm not also saying that the industry doesn't need to get advanced, but it's like the industry will be advanced. We've seen it. Like we know what's coming, like what Barron's can achieve, or what, you know, even on the smaller Chinese Kickstarter side, like what Lucky Harvey can achieve, or whatever. Any of these manufacturers are making crazy things. And that'll have a trickle-down effect, because once there's manufacturing capacity to do all these horology things, they won't go to waste. Like these skills aren't going to get unlearned. So I think that the trickle-down effect is going to happen, and we will benefit from them as enthusiasts. But I think that people need to be patient, and whether it be with their own brand or the product, and I think focus on charging what it costs and what's worth it to keep it alive, and then communicating it, learning to over-communicate it, and teaching people about it. Because I think one thing that you said is that brands talk to you when they have something to sell you. And I think that that's the worst thing. And that's where we kind of try to keep the story going and develop the story, is that we know a lot of people found the Resolute initially on Kickstarter, and they paid for something, you know, at this point 4 years ago, and they are a single-time customer, and they're still subscribed, reading our email and stuff like that. And that's great. That's the thing we love, because the thing is, like, that's a super fan. We value that person not because they've purchased a million times, is that person must be really well versed in my key terms and glossary. Like it's just, that's the thing that's really important. And I think that person, the people around them, will likely at some point buy a watch that will understand the story fully. And I think that that's something that you can't really pay for. Like selling a few more watches for cheap is not going to be as worth it as that guy, or the person who's bought a whole bunch that might buy the next one, and then you'll be sitting on those very niche dials for a while or whatever. Not the right play, I think. And then on the other side, there's people like Tudor making solid gold black bays, and they could make 5 of those, and it's like super valuable in marketing. It's just, or Moonswatch, you know, like Moonswatch is like single-handedly move the needle, and it's demonstrable.
I mean, the thing is, those weren't necessarily line extensions. I guess in some instances they were. And by all means, this is an industry that is ruled by product, right? A great product in the day is what's important, but there's obviously other elements to it. Again, we could talk about that for hours. You shared with me that you at RZE have been developing a digital watch. And what I find interesting is that to develop a low-cost mechanical watch is actually more easy to do than to develop a digital watch. If you want to create your own digital movement or display, that's incredibly complicated and can be very expensive and things like that. Talk a little bit about what it was like for a small brand to develop a product with a digital display, and how is that different than a traditional analog display?
It is incredibly challenging. I think that one thing that people misunderstand about technology, like whether it be digital or mechanical, is that like the movement is the primary factor of cost. I think that that's something that people need to get over, is that like, okay, so if it's digital, it's got to be cheap. Like that module is going to be cheap. It's like, no, if you want it custom, it's going to be a hassle. And then you have to figure out kind of like, there's a reason why the D5600 K-shape module and stuff like that have been the same forever. Like I think that making it fit, making it work, having the buttons work right, having the proportions look right. There's so much to it. And one of the things that we were, so the unique thing about our digital that's coming out is we wanted to make it kind of like compete, I guess, or be at the same level as G-Shock or something like an Iron Man or something like that. So we wanted it to be 200 water resistant, shock resistant, with a shock resisting, thing for the movement. It should stand up to the quality of RZE's products. And then we want it to be compatible with our bracelet. And so, looking at different areas of our supply chains and things like that, and being able to make it fit into our ecosystem perfectly so that someone who owns an accessory that's already in our ecosystem or recognizes the design language can transfer it, that's incredibly challenging. And one of the things that we look at in terms of investment is that this is something that we're investing in, and that we believe that this is something that people want. They're looking for something, like you said, as an enthusiast, that would be wanting to talk a little bit differently about, like, I like a digital, I like that it's always right, and things like that. That's where we wanted to serve that customer. And big challenge.
I think what's interesting, and people don't necessarily think about this, is that there are certain types of watches that a small company can afford to make through the suppliers that exist in small volumes, and that's crucial. Mm-hmm. Other types of watches, as ordinary as they might seem from bigger brands, require huge economies of scale. Like what Casio does, for example, with their digital watches, would be incredibly expensive if you made just a few of them, right? If someone tried to recreate the production of a G-Shock and made their own module and made, 1,000 pieces of it, the things would cost a fortune each.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of features or movements or whatever that would be great in the enthusiast market, but simply aren't available. It's great that you and a few others are trying to embark into the sort of the digital space. But going outside of the sort of traditional analog dial with hands and these types of cases and stuff like that can be remarkably hard. And so there's a lot of very real challenges, mostly economic and related to supply side, of how far the independent brands can go, because I'm sure you and others have incredibly imaginative ideas, but you can't get it made. And that's why a lot of these indie watches end up looking quite similar, because there's very real limitations on the production side. Is any of that changing? Are there going to be, again, there's obviously, this is an interesting market. More and more suppliers are coming out that specialize in this. Do you see things changing on the horizon that will make things like digital display watches easier to develop in the future for small brands than it has been historically?
I think digital is really tough because, like, when it comes to modules, you really hit the nail on the head there. That the digital modules need a huge quantity. Even if you have case manufacturers that can take it on, you're still going to be forced to either use an off the shelf unless you're willing to take on a huge economy, like a huge quantity. And that's something where the risk is, right? And your cases that you develop obviously need unique movement holders and stuff like that, and it's kind of specified to that. And so the challenge of that is often a lot of case makers also are traditionally used to making cases for mechanical movements and stuff like that. And so kind of working towards, for us, we're also wanting, ours is going to be in titanium. So we have a full titanium digital that is compatible with our bracelet. So it would compete with the G-Shock full titanium or full metal at less than the price of the full metal. And so one of those goals was to create something that would feel and perform as though it is like a titanium watch, and feel kind of like anything else that we offer in our catalog, but be digital and our take on it. And so you can innovate within a certain range. I think that people will get better at modifying cases or designing cases to suit existing models. But I think that in terms of complication and stuff like that, it'll still be a ways away. I see some promise because I think there's a lot of programmers and a lot of different displays and stuff like that that may be used, but I think there's going to be still battery limitations and things like that, which are complicated. I worry, I guess, even for ourselves in terms of cost on the digital side, how much demand there is for people, because when we look at things like the Bulova or different unique like throwback, like even like the Tissot like PRX digital and stuff like that, like people have feelings and they think that things like that are cheap. And I think that I don't know if it's noise or whatever, but to us, it's important as a brand because we think that it's legitimate, like an outdoor adventure brand. This is something that we love. Like an 8-lap was my first watch. Digital is something that fits in our collection. I love G-Shock. And maybe this is, like you say, like maybe a brand owner challenge that maybe 2 years down the road might not have been a great idea. But I think that right now, I think it's something where I think we are really pushing the bar and innovating on that. And I think that we look forward to seeing it. I expect to see more mechanical growth in the next couple of years than probably digital.
Let's agree that it's a frontier. And I think that in the future, indie brands are going to be bringing what they do now to mechanical and analog watches, of which there's many quarts, to digital watches. I think what needs to change a little bit is more time needs to go by. Remember that people tend to have nostalgia for things that are no longer there. And low-priced digital watches are still relatively ubiquitous. What's lacking is enthusiasm, passion, and beauty. Very few of them are what we would call attractive. Casio still does huge business with, they call them the vintage, these sort of 1980s and 1990s style, low cost, not even G-Shocks, just digital ones. They're arguably amongst the more attractive ones on the market. And so what I think needs to happen is nostalgia and longing need to develop in the community for a type of product that was ubiquitous and around when people grew up, which is no longer there. And then enthusiast brands can package that nostalgia into beautiful, refined designs that try to remind people the best of what they remember from that era. It's almost identical to what we're seeing with, sport watches from the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s, where people are creating generic aggregates of design principles that were popular back then into satisfying recreations today, sometimes actually recreating things because there is that longing and there's nostalgia for that era. I think that it's interesting to see how much of this is psychology based versus design based. You have the popularity of these 1970s and early 1980s bracelet watches that, you remember when you started getting into collecting watches, no one cared about that stuff. It was considered kind of gaudy and ugly. And if you were a watch collector walking around with, a 222, people will be like, what are you wearing? It isn't until things came full circle and people actually went past their tool watch fascination to now lifestyle watches and actual jewelry items. So it's kind of fascinating how this stuff, its time will come. The time for digital enthusiast watches will come. There's some very understandable challenges, but like I said, I think we can agree that it's a future frontier, right?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we see in cassette, analog audio is the place right now where we're seeing that, right? Is that people want cassette tapes or they want CD players, but the technology available to create what Sony was making back then, it's not there anymore because it's it wasn't worth it to keep that machinery alive.
People don't realize you can't use I'll actually use a perfect example in the watch space, the tuning fork movements, the Accutron. Okay. Citizen through Bulova several years ago did this insane thing where they actually recreated it. And it was such a headache. They did it once and decided never to do it again. Yep. All this old technology requires not just the right machinery, but the right assembly line setup and people to know what to do with it all. Those three elements all have to be there. And, 30 years after they have these giant assembly lines in factories, they tear it all down. And even if they have documents and some people left alive that remember how to do it, you can't just snap your fingers and go to Foxconn and be like, hey, make me this stuff. It just doesn't work.
It doesn't work. And I think that's the thing that people also forget. And it's the testament to Switzerland as well. And all the things that they do by hand that they've been doing forever is that I'll commend China and manufacturing and the skill and what they're doing, but also there's gotta be value to do it, which means there has to be the numbers to do it, or no one's going to invest the time to learn to do it, to make the product, to sell a limited number of them. And that's an interesting thing, I think, is that we will see that, repair of digital things and stuff like that will probably be as complicated. But I think that doing it digital is also further consolidated my respect for Citizen and Seiko and Casio and for the amount of vertical integration that they have, because you realize that while it's the next frontier, it's very much closed off in terms of what you can achieve compared to what you see has been achieved, because we all aspire to the cool things. It's not the same as us trying to recreate something from the 50s with steel, because now we have laser welding and we have 3D print cast molding and all sorts of unique things to kind of bring back that. But digital, it was a different era back then. I think that people are going to get really sad that they didn't get oyster quartz date justs and hold on to them.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, there's obviously so much to talk about here. I want to talk a little bit about the fact that RZE has decided that they will buy back watches from people. I think it's a good move. I think other brands might want to consider their own versions of this. But let's just talk about the situation here. Small brands want people to buy multiple of their watches, but there's a limit, right? People can only get so many. And so if you give people a way of getting rid of their older watches, then you can ostensibly make room for new ones. And when it comes to the indie watches, you have a situation, well, it's not that there's no market for it, but there's no traditional dealers that want to buy the stuff. And if you want to sell it, you either need to go and create a post somewhere like on eBay or a forum, or maybe be part of an enthusiast group where someone wants to trade or buy it. Obviously, the resale on a $400 watch is going to be low, usually sometimes under $100. To take the pictures, to write up a description, stuff like that, people might not even do that. So it's very interesting to invest in this, because at the end of the day, it does increase the potential of volume. Not only are you preventing against the deep discounting that would normally happen on eBay, because obviously there's not a huge market, and you also make it so that your fans can create some empty room to buy new stuff. So there's a lot of benefits to it. Talk about why you started this program. I know you have some terms you applied to it. What your hopes are with it, what phase you're at, and just overall talk a little bit about what you guys at RZE are thinking about this and if it coincides with what I've been saying.
Yeah, and so I think, you nailed all the reasons that we thought about when we did it, and it was a calculated risk when we did it, and I think that's how we came up with the numbers that we offer for the trade-in as well. So the program is called Re-Verified, and so the idea was that we know that a lot of the questions that came up initially when people were buying, if they were new customers, was like, okay, so now I've gotten over the hump of understanding that it's mechanical. And then what happens when it goes, how much is it going to be when something goes wrong or whatever? And I think that was the biggest thing for a lot of first-time customers is I didn't know this thing requires maintenance. And that's a big leap to make from something else, right? And even though we told them these are workhorse movements and stuff like that, there's always still a barrier of I can't believe that I've bought this thing that's X amount of dollars and now I'm going to have to service it. So one of the things that me and Travis talked about is that so now that was 2023. So the people had their watches for 3 years and stuff like that. And we'd had some collections come and go and stuff like that. And so we thought with Ultra Hex, a lot of pieces that came in for service and stuff like that looked pretty much brand new if they needed service at all. Some people just, as enthusiasts, you want to send it in for service just because you want to service it. And then there's other people who, did actually beat them up. And so we were able to replace some parts for them, various things, but case-wise, all good. And so we thought about it and we looked to other places that did refurbishing and things like that, or Christopher Ward doing a nearly new sale on a yearly basis and stuff. And we thought to ourselves, there doesn't need to be kind of a rule or a regular frequency or anything like that. What if we just started telling people we're going to give you X amount and calculate that? And then that allows us to, once it's repaired and stuff like that, we can offer it back to people who are looking for these pieces. So we don't have to make them again, because if we have a certain colorway and we've made 300, we might get an email once in a while for that color, but not regularly enough to restock it. And what we would thought is that there's going to be someone who's eventually going to want to sell that. What happens if we just kind of became matchmaker for that? And we held on to it by investing in ourselves so that if someone wanted to offload it, they would always know what it's worth and stuff. So the math that we figured out that we could kind of cover our costs, pay everybody still, pay our watchmaker and stuff like that, was that no matter what the condition of the watch, if you send it in, we'll give you 40% in credit. And then no matter what the model it is, the color, if it's whatever. Once it's serviced and things like that, we'll sell it back out at 70%. Yeah, and that creates a very clear idea for anybody outside the market, kind of like, okay, I can wait for a used one if I want to try to buy one. I can, if I'm looking for a certain color, maybe it'll pop up there. If you're a real enthusiast, you might be chasing that and you'll wait. But for someone who's coming to the brand, that provides some assurances that they'll be able to trade it in or whatever. It's a really multifaceted. It was like a no lose.
I wanted to compliment you on coming up with a formula rather than trying to assess it on a case-by-case basis. I have independently, and thinking about certain models like this, also come to that conclusion. And that is in contrast from other dealers who always talk about market price, which is total BS and just about them trying to make as much money as they can in an opportunistic way. I don't actually think that formula actually works better for consumers. I think that trying to determine some mathematical formula based upon the original retail price and stuff like that makes sense. I also want to point out that one of the reasons that you can afford to pay as much as you do, so to say, give as much value, is that you are uniquely set up to fix broken stuff, right? Because you would have to limit the watches that come in. There's all kinds of cosmetic damages and stuff like that can occur. But if you are the company and you can replace the crystal or the case because you have tons of spares and you can absorb that cost because it's your own people, you can then know that it's actually more worth it to get that person to trade it in and buy a new one. Won't cost us that much to repair it. And like you said, it could just sit on our website for a long, long time. And most retail stores know that actually the consumer that comes in to buy new things versus the sale items are two completely different people sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you can offer something to both while protecting the integrity of your marketplace on third-party markets where you can't really control it, you control the pricing. I mean, one of the first companies to do something like this was MB&F. Totally different price point, but the wisdom scales down to a smaller brand. It really, really
Absolutely.
does. The problem is when you have in the thousands of watches to deal with.
Yeah.
But at this type of phase, you can still make people happy by doing this, scaling it. It's theoretically possible to a degree with internal people, and you scale it when you're making money so you could theoretically afford it. Yes, there's a lot of things to figure out in how this goes over time and how the math scales, a lot of unknowns, but it seems to make more sense than the alternative. But brands really need to get comfortable with the fact that they are now doing this. It's a formula behind it. It's really about the way they interact with their customer more so than how they develop the products.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think that it's also accepting that, like, to retain that customer is more valuable than the sale. Like, I think that that's the thing, is that, like, sometimes we look at that as an opportunity to kind of keep someone who's been in the ecosystem really happy, and like to be able to talk to someone and say, because, if they bought it on Kickstarter, if they bought it secondhand, they got a deal on it, they may be trading it for more money than when they purchased it at this point. And that's actually really great. Like, I think that there's a lot of people who are excited about that. Or if people decide that they change their mind about a color or things like that, it's not a huge investment. If you get to what you perceive to be the end of life cycle, it's really low risk. So that's the thing that we wanted to make sure, is that nobody is feeling like they're getting ripped off in the equation.
It's going to take more brands to do it for, I think, people to totally familiarize and become comfortable with it. But I think it's a good idea. I think more brands need to do it. Brands obviously can only do it for themselves, right? So if you want the maximum amount of value and for this to make sense, you really need to be doing just your watches, right? Where you have the spare parts and you care enough and you can sell them something of yours. But the next time we chat, I'd like to hear some more updates about this, because this is a really cool program. And I really think it's a great idea and a good type of thing. Huiy, we're basically out of time. There's so much more we could discuss, but we'll have to have another conversation. Before we end, please tell people where they can learn more about RZE and yourself on the internet.
Yeah, you can find us at www.rzewatches.com. You can also find us on Instagram under RZE Watches, and you can join our Facebook group. It's RZE Basecamp on Facebook, and so you'll be able to join our community and meet fellow adventurers that are like-minded and share photos and experiences with your watches.
This has been the Superlative Podcast interview with RZE Watches co-founder Huiy Tang. Huiy, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.